Good luck, Ava.
Congrats on your first assignment. Thanks.
After 400 years of silence, heaven speaks again. And somehow, it's through me. But why was heaven silent for so long? Where was God in the waiting? Where was he in the aching prayers? One, gear up. 2, rehearse lines. He was there, always there. Do not be afraid. 3, enter door. After 400 years of silence, the angels burst onto the scene. And now, I carry a message that will change the course of human history forever.
Please tell me you've had this experience where you send a text message to somebody that you know or love, and then it says, read, 2:47 p.m., and then you get no response. Have you ever had that happen? Now, I'm a dad of 2 teenage boys. That feels like every text message that I ever send to my boys. It's always read and unresponded to. But as bad as that is, I think there's one thing that's just a little bit worse. There's times that you'll send a text message. Again, it says read, and then you get the ... right? And the moment you get that, you've got a little bit of anticipation that they're about to respond, that they're thoughtfully thinking about what they're going to say to you. And you can imagine it's a very well thought out, very long response because it's taking a little bit of time for it to come through. And then the dots go away and it's silent. I don't know if you've had that happen, but at those moments you kind of start making up stories about what's really going on. I mean, what was the fact that you started typing something and then you deleted it? Like, are you upset? Did I say something? I mean, are you concerned? Did I overstep the line? You know, what really is going on? I don't know about you, but for me, I can handle when somebody tells me no. I can handle when somebody tells me not yet. I can handle when somebody says it's just not the right timing. But silence is hard for me. And oftentimes it's actually in the silence of the waiting that I insert all kinds of narratives and make up all kinds of stories about what's really going on. Now, as difficult as that is sometimes with text message exchanges, sometimes prayer feels like that when it comes to our relationship with God, doesn't it? That there's times that we ask God for things, maybe even plead with God for things. And there's times where it feels like heaven says read at 2:47, and then there's seemingly no response. Or maybe worse, there are times where it feels like God is working. There's a divine ... right? The God is working, the God is moving. We're on the cusp of God doing something exceptional and spectacular, and then it's almost like it goes away. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes in those moments, I can also fill it with some sort of narrative or story that maybe I've done something wrong, or maybe I should do something different, or maybe God doesn't care, or maybe God is not good. Oftentimes, we can fill in the space of silence with all kinds of different narratives. So if you've ever had a moment of prayer where it felt like it didn't really make sense, if you've ever had a moment of waiting and longing that felt like it was really, really difficult, I would say this particular story is for you. In the Christmas story, We're going to start a series today that we're calling Messengers, and basically it takes a different perspective on the Christmas story, trying to look at things through the perspective of these angels. Now, there are different angelic encounters all throughout the Bible, but there's a disproportionate amount of them in the Christmas story. There's something about the arrival of the Christ child that God sent multiple messengers to make sure that what was about to happen was really clear. One of those messengers came to this very faithful couple named Zechariah and Elizabeth, who had probably been praying a prayer for literally decades and likely been faced this divine ... of not exactly knowing where God was at or what God was up to. And that's why this angelic arrival and this angelic encounter is really helpful to us to lean into. And so as I lean into this story in Luke chapter 1, I want to share with you a couple different principles that I think are really important for us to wrestle with. Here's the first one when it comes to prayer. That unanswered prayer doesn't mean unheard prayers. There's a difference between something being unanswered and God not hearing it in the first place. And so again, we're going to be in the book of Luke chapter 1. So if you got a Bible, you can go there. Here's what it says starting in verse 5. It says, in the time of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. His wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God. That's a really important detail. It says both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. It says, but they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. Now, the reason why this is so important is Luke was setting up something that would contradict the cultural norm of the day. Back in the ancient world, they would believe if somebody was unable to have a child, it's actually because they were unrighteous. They'd done something wrong. It was God's punishment to them. It was seen as somewhat of a shameful act in the ancient world. So it's actually really important that Luke really calls out that no, they hadn't done anything wrong. They were righteous people. They had done the right types of things. They were very honoring to God with how they lived. But for whatever reason, they weren't able to have a child. Now, the Bible tells us that they were very old. And so I would imagine in the ancient world, this was a prayer that they had prayed likely countless times. Maybe it's a decades-old type of prayer. Because in the ancient world, again, if you didn't have a child, it was actually seen that God might actually be against you. It was somewhat of a shameful type of experience. So every time Elizabeth went to the market, she would have felt the shame of this. Every time that Zechariah went to the temple and he were stewarding the faithful prayers for all the people, he would have felt the weight of his prayer likely being unanswered. And so this is kind of this reminder, this powerful reminder, this principle, this comforting truth for us. I'd like to share with this, that God sees your faithfulness in the waiting, even when the answer hasn't come. It's kind of this reminder that you see through the story that God sees your faithfulness in the waiting, even when the answer hasn't come. Is there something in your life that you pray for or maybe have prayed for that you feel like you've just gotten this divine ... and you're not really knowing what to do with the silence? Maybe it's some sort of medical condition that you battle for quite some time. Maybe you've prayed and prayed and prayed that God might lead you to something different, but no different result has actually come. And you finally come to the place that you're kind of tired of being the person that continues to ask for people to pray for you. You're just waiting for God to do something different in your life. Or maybe you're a single person and you've been longing for that very special somebody to come into your life. And you've prayed for it. You've done what you need to do on your end. You've held to certain convictions. You've lived a pure life. You've done right in the eyes of God. But for whatever reason, that special person hasn't yet come. And if you're not careful, sometimes there's this temptation that I'll just lower the standard. I'll just compromise a conviction in order to ensure that that relationship happens because it's a struggle in the waiting. Or maybe it's a dream. Maybe it's a dream that you feel like God gave you a long time ago, that God placed this dream, this purpose in your heart, that one time it was on fire and you prayed about that dream. You were anticipating God to bring that to fruition, but for whatever reason, it hasn't. And now you're at the place that you're struggling because people who appear to be half as talented as you are stepping into things that they pray for quite some time, and it kind of has you at this place that you're tempted to just let it go. That maybe that dream is not really the right dream, or maybe that purpose is not the right purpose. Maybe I should just kind of go and do something altogether. Like we've all been there. We all have a story like that. But I would say this. Like for Zechariah and Elizabeth, they weren't just waiting for a child. They were preparing to raise the forerunner of Jesus. And it's almost like recognizing that God was not done working, even if it required for him to do something impossible. Again, the Bible described that Zechariah and Elizabeth, they were very old. To have a child in their older years would have taken really some sort of act of God. But what if the silence of God was not just for no reason? What if God was preparing them for something significant? Because they weren't just going to have any child. They were going to have a child whose name would be John. He would be John the Baptist. He'd be the forerunner for the Messiah. What if God was actually preparing them for what was coming? I would go as far to say this. I heard a pastor say this a long time ago, and it's always stuck with me. He said this: what God does in you while you wait is just as important, if not more important, than what you're waiting for. Now, sometimes that's a truth that's hard for us to truly embrace. Because what I want is for the medical thing to go away. What I want is for that relationship to happen. What I want is for that dream to be realized. What we want is the circumstance around us that we've been praying for God to show up in the way that we want, the way that we expect in our timing. But what if what God is doing in us while we wait is just as important, if not more important, than whatever we're praying for? I think for Zechariah, he kind of tucked away this prayer. And so I think my challenge to all of us is, if there's this tucked away prayer in our journey, I would encourage you to consider bringing that prayer back to God this Christmas season. And I would say just by bringing that prayer back, that in itself is an act of faith. It takes faith to bring that back. In other words, it's easier to kind of just let it go. It's easier to just kind of move on, because sometimes it's painful to even hope again. But I would encourage you to bring the prayer back, because even that step is a step of faith, because it's saying, God, I still believe you're good. God, I still believe that you hear me. God, I still believe that you're at work. God, I still believe that you're active. I'm going to take that step and bring it back to you, believing that even what you're doing in me right now is just as important as what I'm ultimately waiting for. Now, it was within that context that the text progresses, and we get to see this incredible encounter. Now, it says this in verse 8. It says, once Zechariah's division was on duty when he was serving as a priest before God, he was chosen by lot. So in other words, it was almost like this random chance that got him to do what's about to be described. So he's serving as a priest before God. He was chosen by lot according to the custom of the priesthood to go into the temple of the Lord and to burn incense. Now, let me give you a little bit of history or a little background what's going on. Zechariah was a priest. In the ancient Israel, there would have been a lot of priests. And the priest did all kinds of different priestly functions, but every now and then there was a priest that would go into the holy place and next to the Holy of Holies in the temple, which was this very, very sacred space to burn the incense. And it was such an important role and such a sacred place that they casted lots. It was kind of a way to draw straws to see who would have the opportunity to do this. And because there were so many priests, oftentimes priests would do this one time in their lifetime. So for Zechariah, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I would argue it was not by chance. It was actually by God's purpose, because that's where this angelic encounter happens. It says, then the angel of the Lord appeared to him standing at the right side of this altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and he was gripped with fear. But the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zechariah. Look at this phrase. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John. Now, I love this statement. It says, your prayer has been heard. Not that it will be heard, not that God will consider it one day, but all along. Every time that it felt like this divine ... that God has always heard your prayer. I mean, every sleepless night, God heard your prayer. I mean, every whispering of hope, God heard your prayer. Every quiet moment, God heard your prayer. Every desperate plea, God heard your hope. That an unanswered prayer does not mean an unheard prayer. That was true for Zechariah. I think that's true for you and I as well. Here's the second principle that I want to make sure that we get as well. I would say this, that invisible doesn't mean inactive. That just because I can't see it doesn't mean that God's not active in it. It reminds me of a story, this was years ago, when my oldest son was pretty young. He could have been more than 7 or 8 years old. And I was having that conversation that we have where we ask kids, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? And so I was talking to him, again, 7, 8 years old, and I was like, Levi, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he's like, I don't know, Dad. You know, maybe I'll run my own business one day. Or maybe I'll be a police officer one day. And he said, but if all else fails, I'll just be a pastor. If all else fails. I'm like, what's behind that? And so I asked him, I'm like, what do you mean by that? He's like, well, I mean, you just get up on a stage and run your mouth on Sundays and don't do anything else the rest of the week. I mean, how hard could that be? Well, after I wrote him out of the will, I explained to him that there's a lot that he doesn't see. But I can't blame him. I mean, again, he's 7 or 8 years old. He can only see what he sees, but there's so much that he doesn't see. He doesn't see the hospital visits. He doesn't see the prayers in the waiting rooms. He doesn't see the late night phone calls and the early morning meetings. He doesn't see the time with the staff to cast some vision, to develop some strategy, to unify us around a common purpose. He doesn't see the building of systems to serve as many of his people that God will bring under our care. He doesn't see the weddings. He doesn't see the funerals. He doesn't see the counseling moments. He doesn't see the conflict resolution moments. He doesn't see the spicy emails. There's just so much that he doesn't see, right? And so I can't be too hard on him. He can only see what he sees, but that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of activity going all throughout the week. The same is true with God. That sometimes because we don't see him moving, we can assume that God's not active. Because we don't see him in the way that we would anticipate, we assume that means that he's not doing really anything at all. But I would argue that invisible doesn't mean inactive. You see this as you go back to the text. Let me take us back to the book of Luke, chapter 1, verse 14. Again, this angel speaking to Zechariah, he says this. He says that he will be a joy and a delight to you. And many will rejoice because of his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He's never to take wine or other fermented drink, or he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he's born. He'll bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God. He will go before the Lord, and in the spirit, the power of Elijah. He'll turn the hearts of the parents to their children, and to the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous. Then look at this last statement. To make ready a people prepared for the Lord. In other words, you kind of get this sense that even if Zechariah and Elizabeth's prayer to have a child was decades old, they couldn't have seen what God was orchestrating in a way that they couldn't see. That God was, in a sense, preparing the entire nation for the arrival of the Messiah, and their son was going to be the forerunner for this Messiah. So think about like what they didn't see. The work that you can't see, oftentimes I would argue is the most important work. And what they couldn't see is that God was arranging the political landscape to create the possibility of the Messiah to come into the world. What they couldn't see is that God was positioning even Mary and Joseph and Nazareth to become the parents of the Messiah in the world. What they couldn't see is that God was stirring the hearts of Israel for a hunger for the Messiah that they hadn't seen in literally centuries. What they couldn't see is that God was shaping Zechariah and Elizabeth's character to prepare them to be the parents of this important child who was coming into the world. What they couldn't see is that God was orchestrating a census that would bring all the people to the right places at the right time for God to do what only they could do. And so what's really fascinating is there was only the piece they could see. There's so much that they couldn't see. And the same can be true for your life and for my life. The things that we pray for, that we long for, that sometimes it feels like God's silent in. That just because it looks invisible doesn't mean that God is inactive. I would argue that God is arranging circumstances in your life that you can't see. You know, early in our service across all of our locations, we shared with you an invite opportunity. And we talked about this Christmas box that we'd love for you to take even today, and that you'd fill it with all kinds of goodies, whether you put cookies in there or hot chocolate or whatever you decide to do, with an invite to invite people to join you for Christmas here at Willow. Now, here's what we anticipate. We anticipate that people are more open to an invite around Christmas season than any other time of the year. We will see 2 to 3 times as many people on Christmas than we do really any other time of the year, because there's this openness, this receptivity. So here's what I believe. What if it's possible that though it's invisible, God is actually very active in the life of your friend, your neighbor, your family member, your coworker, that God has actually gone before you. God is actually stirring something in them, that a simple invite that God extends through you could actually be catalytic in somebody experiencing hope, maybe in a new way, maybe in a fresh way, maybe for the very first time. That maybe, just maybe, God has been orchestrating things so much so that it culminates through a very simple invite in a creative way. Would we be people, you be people, that extend that invite so that people can come to know of the good news and the hope of Jesus? I ran across this quote this week that I found was really powerful. Priscilla Schreier says this: when we cannot trace his hand, we can still trust his heart. Do you believe that to be true? Like, when you can't trace his hand, when you can't see all that he's doing, we can be people that still trust his heart. I would say this about Zechariah. He couldn't trace what God was doing. He couldn't see the whole picture. He just kept believing that God is good even when God's plan felt hidden. And so what we know about this, we know about God through this passage is that unanswered prayers don't mean unheard prayers. That God's invisible work doesn't mean he's inactive, but it sets us up for this third piece. That doubting doesn't mean disqualified. Because sometimes we feel like if we doubt or we're unsure, we don't really know what to make of it, that somehow disqualifies us in some way. But we'll discover that doubting doesn't mean disqualified. Let's go back to the story. Luke chapter 1, it says this: then Zechariah asked the angel, how can I be sure of this? This whole like me and my wife having a baby at our current age, how can I be sure of this? I'm an old man. My wife is well along in her years. Now, Zechariah is a wise man. He says, I'm old. My wife is well along in years. Well done, sir, right? But notice this question. How can I be sure of this? Now, I don't want to be too hard on Zechariah. I can't imagine what the moment is like that this messenger, this angel shows up like full glowing and present and all that kind of stuff, and then says this powerful message, you're going to have a son, and his first response audibly is, how can I be so sure? There's a little bit of doubt in him. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us exactly where the doubt came from, so it's a little speculation on my part, but here's my assumption of what's going on. That his hope had been buried a long time ago. That he had just kind of come to accept the fact that they were not going to have children, and he was going to need to be fine with that. But the thought that now the angel was saying that he was going to have a child meant that he had to take that buried hope and he had to bring it back again. And that feels risky. Because if I bring it back again and then I get let down again, it feels even more painful the second time. And so he's like, God, I can't do that. If I need to accept it and move on, I'll accept it and move on. But if you're asking me to bring that hope back, can I have a little certainty? How can I be like really, really sure of this? And so I would go as far to say this principle is true. God can handle your doubt and still work his purpose. Zechariah's got a little uncertainty. But God can handle that and still work his purpose in and through your life. Now, as the angel responds in a way that I would say is a little bit harsh, but if we stick with it, I actually think there's some mercy in it as well. Here's how Gabriel responds. He says, I'm Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God. I've been sent to speak to you and to tell you this good news. I mean, the fact that you're going to have a baby, that's really good news. And now you will be silent, and you're not going to be able to speak until this day happens, because you did not believe my words, which will come true at their appointed time. And so it's almost like Zechariah experiences a little bit of a punishment. Like he doubted, he was uncertain, and then the angel strikes him mute. I mean, that feels like, wowzers, that feels like a little harsh, doesn't it? But there's another way to look at it. Maybe he was actually very merciful. Because there's something about when he's not able to speak, that means he wouldn't have been able to speak his questions out loud necessarily, his concerns out loud necessarily. It means that he wouldn't be able to question, he wouldn't be able to doubt out loud. Instead, he could only see the promise of God growing daily in the womb of his wife. The fact that he wasn't audible kept him more in tune to that promise of God that was growing daily in the womb of his wife. That eventually, after 9 months, eventually this son comes into the world. They name him John. And if you track a little bit later in the book of Luke chapter 1, you see that eventually Zechariah regains his voice. After John is born, he begins to not only regain his voice, he launches into this worship-filled, praise-filled acknowledgement of incredible things that God has done. But if you really look at it, you can really see the transformation that Zechariah personally has experienced. It really is unbelievable at the front part of the story to the back end of the story. What God has done in his life is absolutely exceptional. You can see it in this way. We read this verse earlier, that when Zechariah first saw the angel, like early on, it says he was startled, and look what it says. He was gripped with fear. Later in the book of Luke, it says this, in this worship-filled song, he says that he will rescue us from the hand of our enemies and enable us to serve him without fear. Do you see the transformation that's taken place in his own life, going from gripped with fear to praising God like without any fear? I mean, the transformation in his life is amazing. He went from questioning God's purpose to declaring God's purpose. He went from doubting God's timing to praising God's timing. He went from protecting his own heart to opening his own heart wide open in worship. What God did in him while he waited was just as important, if not more important, than what he was waiting for. So here's my challenge. Make it real practical for us. I'm going to challenge you to take maybe 3 steps. Here's the first. The first step is this. I want to encourage you, if there is a prayer that maybe you prayed for quite some time, that prayer's gone dormant for whatever reason, would you in faith bring that prayer back to God this Christmas season? That act is a supernatural act of faith in of itself. And maybe, just maybe, we'll see God work in a supernatural way. But I want to encourage you, bring that prayer back. The second piece of what I described earlier, I'd love to encourage you to invite somebody to Christmas at Willow. To take a box, grab an invite, fill that box, send it to somebody. You'll just never know how you might partner with God in ways that are unseen as God's orchestrating things in the life of somebody you love. The third piece is this. Today we're going to pack some hope packs. And I love this about what we get to do is we get to provide a Christmas gift to every incarcerated individual in a state prison facility all throughout the state of Illinois, and then also in surrounding areas as well. Think about it in this way. There are those that oftentimes feel forgotten by our society or kind of pushed aside or people don't think about them very often. And oftentimes this group of people is saying a prayer as well. And what if this simple hope pack, it's just a simple gift that reminds this group of people that you are seen, you are loved, God has not forgotten you, and it's a way to take the unseen ways of God and make them seen in practical and tangible ways. And so we're going to take the opportunity to pack some hope packs in our services today. But before we do that, I'm going to close out today's message, and we're actually going to do this throughout this series. As we just thought we'd be a little creative, we would imagine if we experienced an angelic encounter, like if one of these messengers came to you and met you wherever you were at, maybe in your living room, and if God were to send this angel to say a message to you, what would God say to you? And each week we're going to make these simple letters available on the Willow app. We'll also make them available at willowcreek.org/nextsteps. But if you allow me to, let me read a message that I think that God wants you to receive. It says this: people of God, do not lose heart in silence. I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of the Almighty, and I have been sent to speak these words to you. Your prayers have been heard, not ignored, not forgotten, heard. I know the weight of what you carry, the years that have passed, the hope that's dimmed, the dreams that you buried because believing again felt too costly. But hear me now. Heaven has not abandoned you. The silence you feel is not absence. It's this sacred pause of God who works on an eternal timeline. What you call delay, He calls preparation. What looks like stillness is divine orchestration beneath the surface. Your waiting is not wasted. Every day of faithfulness in silence is seen. Every prayer whispered in doubt is treasured. God has not asked you to be perfect. He's asked you to remain. And you have. And that matters. But know this: His plan is always bigger than your request. Zechariah prayed for a son. God gave him the forerunner, the Messiah. You're praying for your story. But God's writing a greater narrative, one where your answered prayer intersects with the lives of others in ways that you cannot see. Here's the mystery you must trust. God is not only concerned with answering your prayer. Your waiting is about who you're becoming. He's preparing you to recognize His presence when He moves. So lift your eyes. The God who remembered Zechariah remembers you. The one who kept His promise then will keep His promise now, always in the way that's best. So do not give up. Do not let disappointment harden into bitterness, because I've seen the throne and I can tell you this: heaven is moving. Keep believing, keep praying, keep serving faithfully, for the Lord's hand is with you. And what He has promised, He will fulfill at the appointed time. Do not be afraid. Your breakthrough is coming. God, in many ways, that's our prayer. And God, I don't know the weight of the prayers that feel from our perspective as unanswered. I don't know all of those prayers that we hold today. But God, you do. And in faith, we believe that even though they feel unanswered, God, we believe that you hear us. Every cry, every moment, every word. And Father, even when we can't see you at work, would you remind us that you're incredibly active, maybe in ways that we can't yet see. God, would you give us the trust, the faith, to believe that you are good, that you're working for good, that you're working for best in ways that we couldn't even begin to comprehend. Father, but in moments of doubt, would you help us not even disqualify ourselves, but recognize that you can work your great purpose even in seasons of our doubt. God, we do believe. Help us with our unbelief. God, we look to you. We say thanks. In Jesus' name, amen.